is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the driver of a 4x4 that crashed into a school in Wimbledon and killed two 8-year-old girls has been rearrested. 2 young girls died when it happened in July 2023. LBC's Henry Riley has more.
An initial investigation resulted in a direction from the CPS in June 2024 that the driver should face no further action. But it was then agreed that there would be a review of the investigation. That review identified further lines of inquiry, and last October the investigation was reopened.
The families of the victims of a helicopter crash at Leicester City's stadium in 2018 have welcomed the outcome of an inquest which found the deaths of their loved ones were accidental. The Premier League club's owner at the time was among 5 people on board. A further £17 million of UK aid's being promised to the people of Gaza. The government says the money will go towards food, medicines and rebuilding the territory. And the Prime Minister has ruled out setting a cap to cut migration levels after the UK population was projected to grow by almost 5 million in a decade. Downing Street instead promised a comprehensive plan to reduce migration. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 30 points, 85.33. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.19. LBC weather: clear spells in the south tonight, cloudier in the north with showers expected across Scotland and a low of 1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
And a very warm welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. It's 2 minutes past 8. I'm Iain Dale. On the panel with me, sitting next to me on my left, is Kirsty Blackman, SNP MP for Aberdeen North. Next to her is Greg Smith, the Conservative MP for Mid Buckinghamshire. To my right, Zoe Gardner, independent immigration policy expert and campaigner. And to her right, James Starkey, former political advisor to Priti Patel, Michael Gove and Dominic Raab. And he's now a partner at 5654 Consultancy. They're here to take your questions. The number to call 0345 6060 973, and you can WhatsApp us on that number or text 84850. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, well, let's start off with a WhatsApp question from Joe, who says, was Brexit sold on lies given that it's not reduced immigration? Now, the Office for National Statistics has projected today that almost entirely as a result of net migration, the UK population will increase by almost 5 million by the year 2032 to 72.5 million. And that is said to be almost entirely due to immigration. Greg Smith, was it sold on a lie?
No, I don't think it was, because when I think back to that referendum, people voted for Brexit on many different reasons. I voted for Brexit on the grounds of Britain becoming a sovereign country. Again, I didn't vote for Brexit on the basis of immigration. I think ending free movement and having a fair system of immigration where no matter where you come from in the world, you are treated the same and fairly on merit is a fundamentally good thing to do. And through the points-based system we introduced in the last Parliament. The overall immigration numbers, though, Kemi Badenoch has been very clear that those numbers are not something we're particularly proud of from the last government, and it is something that we need a clear plan on to get control of within the realms of actually needing immigration from many sectors. My constituency is an agricultural
legitimate immigration.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, people think that it's people coming here illegally. It's actually a very small proportion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was about to say, my constituency is an agricultural constituency. Seasonal agricultural workers are actually critical to the very economic well-being of my area. But I don't think Brexit was sold on a lie, because the fundamentals of Brexit were about sovereignty. And if people got confused about ending the freedom of movement being about something bigger, then I think that is regrettable. And it's not something I was pushing as part of the Vote Leave campaign.
The other interesting thing is that if you look at the statistics, there are more people here now from EU countries than there was before Brexit, which I think a lot of people will be surprised by, but it hasn't stopped European immigration either.
No, it hasn't. But I go back to this point about fairness. It was a point I made back in 2016, and I've carried on making. The old system of freedom of movement was, if you're from one of these 27 countries, come in, no questions asked. If you're from anywhere else in the world, we're going to have a hard look at you. Well, actually, I think we need to have a system based on on merit, the points-based system that we've got that could be tweaked, where no matter where you're from in the world, if you can offer something to Britain, the United Kingdom, then you'll be treated equally and fairly.
You're sounding perfectly reasonable on immigration, but many of your party don't sound as reasonable as you. They come across as being very anti-immigration, anti-immigrant. That's presentationally, that's a bit of a problem, isn't it?
It's certainly something that we've got to focus on very carefully. We've got to come up with policy through the policy commissions that the Conservatives are about to start that looks at the role of immigration, that looks at the overall numbers that, as a country, as an economy, that we need, and make a reasonable case around that. I've certainly never been anti-immigration. I'm certainly pretty hardline when it comes to illegal immigration, when it comes to those coming to this country without the proper visas and the proper application process and channels, those coming across in small boats, etc. But when it comes to legal migration, when it comes to proper legitimate economic migration, we've got to come up with a policy that recognises where we need people to come in and support the National Health Service or our economy, or in my constituency, big space sector. Literal rocket science happens in Buckinghamshire, where we're very reliant on some of that immigrant skill set.
Are you reliant on space technology in Aberdeen, Kirsty?
Well, there's been a bit of work on space technology, yeah, because working in space and working undersea like you do in renewables, for example, is very similar in terms of the extreme environments that you're working in. I know. So anyway, that was a nice segue.
On the question, was Brexit sold on lies, given that it's not reduced immigration?
I mean, Brexit was sold on lies, right? We're told we're going to get millions of pounds a week for the NHS. And I think if you speak to nurses and doctors and people who are trying to get appointments or time in hospital, then they're not seeing that millions of pounds that was supposed to appear as a result of this Brexit bonanza that we were going to get.
Because, of course, you're right that there hasn't been £350 million a week gone into the NHS. It's actually been £794 million.
We're not seeing the positive benefits that were promised from Brexit, right? And some people were promised, absolutely, and believed that a reduction in immigration would mean that their lives would get better. Right? They were told, your lives are rubbish because of immigration, because of the fact that too many people are coming to live in the UK. Now, it's nonsense. It was never the case, because we know that if you increase the numbers in terms of immigration, you reduce public sector net debt. We know that if you increase the numbers in terms of immigration, then the people that are coming here are more likely to be net contributors to the economy. Right? Immigration is a good
limit,
thing.
Doesn't there?
Immigration is a good thing.
Do you not think we've reached that limit?
And I don't think we've reached that limit. No, if you ask people who are looking for places in care homes, whether there are enough care workers, if you ask the local care organisation in my constituency, are you able to get people to work as a care worker? No, they're not. And actually, there are many, many of those roles that we could be doing with. And if you put things like the kind of salary cap, and you're saying that people have got to earn a certain salary, if you reduce the number of postgraduate positions, for example, for students going into postgraduate stuff, then you're reducing the immigration that we actually need. So in terms of a points-based system, right, have a points-based system if you want to have a points-based system, but do it on what the economy needs, not on this kind of daft point of, well, they've got to be earning over a certain amount. Right, actually look at what is required. And I think immigration is a good thing, right? I'm not saying that immigration should be unlimited. I'm not saying there should be no limits. I think a cap is a daft idea.
What about Greg's point about having now a level playing field, so anybody from anywhere in the world comes into the system, we're not giving preference to people from the EU. Surely that has to be fairer.
I mean, I don't know if it's fairer necessarily.
Well, if everybody's starting from the same point.
But it's nonsense, they're not.
Aren't they? Go on then.
No, because this idea, it sounds great, of a points-based system, and anybody who reaches this amount of points, they can get in. It's not actually really how the system works at all. So for a start, you have to be sponsored by an employer. If you're not, you don't get enough points. So it's not really a points-based system, it's an employer sponsorship system. And you talked about the seasonal agricultural workers scheme. Well, previously to Brexit, that was overwhelmingly work undertaken by migrants from the EU who had freedom of movement rights. That meant that they were able to change the farm they worked at if they were being abused by their employer. Under the current seasonal agricultural workers scheme, this visa is so restrictive as to produce a systemic risk of exploitation, and there have been multiple cases of reported modern slavery and gangmasters abusing the workers on these farms who are systematically underpaid. agreed. So what, in fact, getting rid of freedom of movement was, it may have equalised the playing field. It has equalised the playing field down to an incredibly low level where you have had to make these exceptional schemes to bring in seasonal workers on an even more restrictive visa here and care workers on an even more restrictive visa there. And each of them have a different set of rights that is more restrictive than the last and that leaves them open to widespread and systemic workplace exploitation. So it hasn't made things fairer. It's made things a whole lot worse for everybody. Now that applies to Europeans just as equally as it applies to people from the rest of the world. The immigration system is an utter mess. People from across the political spectrum, up and down the country agree. And that is the legacy that you have left us with.
Wow. James, you were at the Home Office with Priti Patel. Defend your record.
And I was on the Vote Leave campaign. I think, going back to the original question, was Brexit sold on a lie? No, because the question around immigration in particular was about control, take back control. So the issue with freedom of movement is politicians, when there was increased immigration, could say, well, in the UK, in Parliament, not very far from where we are now, there's nothing I can do about it, because I can't control what's coming from the EU. So that area of immigration, fundamentally, the sovereign parliament didn't have any control over.
But what's changed?
So we do now. And that's why people can be frustrated. And that's why people can hold people like Kirsty and Greg responsible, because it's up to Parliament to pass the legislation, the Parliament in this country that people vote for, that decides the level of that immigration. So we brought in Priti Patel, the Conservative government, a points-based system, which is still in place. You can tweak that points-based system. You can argue about the merits of certain elements of the visas. That's fine, about who should come in. And we also forget that a lot of the size of the migration in recent years is in terms of the numbers, is actually when we've allowed people from Hong Kong through the B&O visas and Ukraine and Afghanistan. That was not necessarily last year, but recent years should also be taken into account when we look at numbers. But on the control element, on was it sold on a lie? No, because Keir Starmer now and Yvette Cooper they are responsible for those immigration numbers.
But how many immigration bills did the Tories have? I mean, there was so many immigration bills put in by the Tories. So surely they've had the opportunity to put in control.
So my point is not about opportunity. My point is that under the current legislation, and which also could be changed, but in the Home Office now, they can change the points.
They have changed. They've changed, for example, the rights associated with a care worker visa. I will emphasise again, nothing to do with how many points, because it's not really a points-based system. But care workers can no longer bring their spouse and their children under the age of 18 years old to accompany them when they come and care for our family members in the UK. That was one of the last things that the last Conservative government did on immigration. That has resulted in a 90% drop in applications for people to come and work in our health and social care sector over the last 9 months. So yeah, you have control. Does anybody want that? Does anybody think that's good? I'm afraid not.
But forgive me, there you're arguing about the merits of a specific visa, which is fine. You may have a point, and we may decide that we need more people in the care sector, NHS, or other professions, the building sector, for example. But the point remains that the government now controls the amount of people that comes in. And
but what's the point in the government having control if it doesn't do anything useful with it? If it makes the situation worse, if it means that my constituents are less likely to be able to access the care workers that they need, if they're less likely to be able to access any of the support that they need because we don't have, what is the point in having control if it's then going to be misused?
Also, that control results directly in increased rates of exploitation throughout all areas of low-paid work in our economy. So that includes, as I said, the seasonal workers. It includes a drastic problem that's been the case for the care workers coming on that specific visas. Is it the problem with what we're talking about is you're saying we now have control over the numbers. The way in which the Conservative government repeatedly tried to exert control over numbers was by cutting the rights of the migrants who came here, rather than actually doing what now, as cowards from opposition, they're calling for a cap. But they couldn't put a cap on it when they were actually in government because it's not a realistic policy. So what they did was they cut people's rights, and that made people vulnerable.
Just on that, and it is going slightly off the question, but are you seriously arguing that care workers, who often are on minimum wage or just above, should be allowed to bring spouses and children, which they can't possibly support on that kind of wage?
But what immigrants coming on the care workers visa are not entitled to access benefits, for example. So they have to be supporting themselves on the care workers' salary.
But you couldn't possibly do that. If you say you have 3 children and a spouse, you're renting.
Working too. Why would your spouse not be working? They're entitled to work. I think there's been some confusion sown by the. Yeah, but the spouse visa that they come on, the dependent visa, I think the term dependent has been misused and sort of used to spread some confusion about this. It sounds like they're dependent economically. Actually, they're only dependent in terms of their right to be in the UK depends on the care worker visa that their spouse have. In many cases, actually, both spouses are working in the care sector, but in other cases, the spouse will be working in other forms of employment in order to support themselves. Because, as I say, migrants on these visas are denied access to the welfare state. They cannot access benefits, housing benefit, child support, any of that. So they have to be able to support themselves. So they are supporting themselves. In fact, they should be being paid far better wages.
Well, we can all agree on that.
I'm sure that we all agree on that.
Right, thank you very much. Very, very pleasant discussion compared to one or two that we had last night. May I just say, I didn't really have to intervene at all. Excellent, let's keep it going. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
Kirsty Blackman from the SNP, Greg Smith from the Conservatives, and Zoe Gardner, independent immigration policy expert and campaigner, and James Starkey, partner of 5654 Consultancy. Go on then, 5654, why?
So 5654 is the Admiralty Code of the lighthouse in Cornwall in Godrevy, and we chose it because, one, Cornwall's absolutely beautiful, and we take our company there every year, and it also kind of signifies, communication in the storm.
Fantastic. I should get you to sponsor the Foy Literary Festival, of which I'm a patron. We should talk afterwards.
Let's talk on that.
Right, let's go to Stephen in Leeds. Stephen, hi, what would you like to say?
First off, good evening all. So mine's a question that does sort of cover immigration as well as the whole child age of criminality. So, my understanding is the age of culpability in the UK for criminal offences is 10 years and above. So let's say that these kids, would we look at reviewing the age of that in the future if we're going to give these kids a clean slate? And again, what kind of criminality would they have to achieve, i.e. low level, high level, to get that clean slate? And the last bit would be, how would we be able to look at people coming from other countries that are just about 18 but may have intelligence or criminality from their country of origin? How would we look at them and bring them into country through immigration without knowing or having any information if they have got criminality behind them?
Well, as we were discussing in the last hour, England's Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel de Souza, has suggested that children convicted of offences relating to last summer's riots should have those offences wiped from their criminal records. The age of criminal responsibility is indeed 10 in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but it's now 12 in Scotland. Until 2019, it was only 8. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I knew that there was a kind of understanding in Scotland or expectation in Scotland that younger children were capable of being criminals, but it's nice that it's been upgraded.
So do you think 12 is the right age? Because I think there's going to be quite a debate about this in the future.
I think 12 makes sense. I think that in terms of some of the stuff that we've done around the legal system in Scotland, some of the approaches that we have is about, trying not to, you don't want to criminalise people. You don't want to put people into the criminal justice system if there's other alternative things that you can do. You want people to be positive members of society, right? You don't want them to end up down that path. So what can you do to put in place? What supports can you put in place to ensure that those kids don't do that again? What can you do to ensure that the kids are getting the help that they need, that they're going to school, that they're doing all of those things, rather than just saying, well, you're a criminal, and that's it, full stop. You've got to pay for your crimes.
But what do you do? I mean, there was a case recently, I think, of an 11-year-old being convicted of rape. I mean, in Scotland, that wouldn't have happened, would it? They would have presumably got off.
But it doesn't, just because you're not criminally responsible doesn't mean you haven't done something bad.
No, but then you need to be, surely there needs to be punishment.
There's a different, well, there are punishments. There are punishments in place. There are things, so you do need punishment in place, just like, I'll punish my children for doing something nasty.
But if the age of responsibility is 12 in Scotland and the person who's...
the age of criminal responsibility, right? So you're still saying that kid has done something that they should not have done, and we are going to punish them and ensure that they do not do it again.
But how do you do that? Sorry, I'm not familiar with the legal system.
You do all sorts of things. You put in place to make sure, have they got somebody with parental responsibility? Have you got somebody that's looking after them? Are they attending school? Have they got positive destinations to go to? Do they have enough food in their stomachs that they don't need to be shoplifting? What is it that needs to be?
But if an 11-year-old commits a serious offence like rape or stabbing, what consequences are there if the criminal age is 12?
Well, you don't want somebody to be in a prison system at that point, right? What you want is supports in place to ensure that the population is kept safe from them if they're likely to do it again, but also they're supported. So they're supported with schooling, they're supported with education, they're supported with those positive things that they can be doing. You don't want somebody who, has done something horrific to never be allowed to contribute. How do you teach them that
they've done something horrific if there is no effective consequence, if there is no punishment?
But there is a consequence and there is a punishment. Just because you're not at the age of criminal responsibility and that you can be tried in a court through that, there's still youth justice panels and things that take place in Scotland. There's youth justice teams within our local authorities that deal with young children that have done things that they shouldn't have done.
Okay.
And again, provide that support, ensure that they are being re-engaged in positive things.
So, James, the age is 10 in England, 12 in Scotland. What do you think it should be?
I don't honestly know. I would say I myself, in a previous flat, we were, me and my family were the victims of offenders that would have been maybe 12, 13. They were carrying knives, they were involved in a gang and so on. We went back and forth to prison. I say this because I feel like I've kind of seen it from both sides, in that when you're the victim of a crime, you don't... Does it matter to you? To me, at the time, the age of that person, that was traumatic. I had young children at the time, and it was difficult. We had to deal with the police for a long time in the council. At the same time, I saw that kid when I first moved in, and he was a really sweet 10-year-old boy, and he gradually got involved with a group of people, and he ended up going to prison, I think, when he was about 17 for something else. And you saw the slope, and I saw this when I grew up in Northampton with friends that I went to school with. Once you get trapped in it, you kind of you lose. I think for the grace of God go I. They were the mates that I hung around with, and I think it gets hard to get a job. You kind of get locked out maybe of school. So I don't know the age, but I do know you've got to find the right balance, because when you write kids off, that's it. You send them down there for life. You can have all the youth centres you want. It's really hard to get back out of the kind of culture that you get into. Equally, I've been the victim of it, and it doesn't matter what age they are, it's not very nice to live with.
You put that so much better than I did, thank you.
Zoe Garden.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with I think it's really important to consider that sort of that journey that children go on, and I think is vital. Even in the context of these riots, which were despicable displays of violence, in cases serious violence with intent to cause serious harm and potentially murder on the part of the adults involved,
and children.
Well, I think
I've got the figures here. There were 147 children were arrested, 84 were charged during the riots. The analysis found that 93% were boys, 92% were between 14 and 17. The youngest was 11.
Yeah, well, I think we need to... These riots were despicable, and I think that we need to be doing more, frankly, as a society to talk about their impact and what has and hasn't been done and what lessons have and haven't been learned from that. But I do think that criminalising children for their involvement, and I have read the Children's Commissioner's take on this, and she says that this was largely about people who just got involved out of a sense of excitement. There was something going on in their town. They were hanging around with their friends on the street, and this was a big event, and they felt antagonism towards the police far more so than towards potentially the migrants. So I think that there is a need to have a degree. There should be consequences, there should be repercussions, but I think there should also be sensitive, caring interventions, because those children, sounds trite, but we're not born racist. We're not born hating foreigners. We're not born hating asylum seekers or thinking we should go and set fire to a hotel, right? So it was the adults around them who have been letting them down. There's clear evidence that adults were goading some of these young children, this 13-year-old girl who's on video kicking the door of the asylum hotel. I can't blame her. I think the adults around her have absolutely failed her, and that she needs the support and the access to services, youth support, youth centre. If these kids had something interesting and exciting going on in their lives that evening that was, suited to young people, then they wouldn't have got involved in this. And
do you really believe that? Because I always think that is an excuse that is often trotted out. I can't speak for everyone on this panel, but throughout the ages, boredom has been used as an excuse to excuse criminal behaviour, and it's just not valid.
I don't think that it's an excuse if you actually commit serious crimes, but I do think that there's a need to recognise that, first of all, the vast majority of crime is committed by young men from socially and economically deprived backgrounds. Now, is there something inherent that we have to stamp out of them? Or are there interventions that we can actually make that will make our communities safer by addressing the needs of those people and channeling their energies into different and better things? I think it's quite obvious that giving these kids a criminal record that will mark them for the rest of their life won't actually do our country any good. And I would add that I think we need to move away a little bit from judging when people commit despicable acts. Obviously we should judge them. But if somebody does something or says something that is harmful or racist or that we disagree with, that doesn't mean that we should write the entire person off. And we have a culture at the moment that is so black and white about this, and people, feel fear about being cancelled or being, cut off. And we need to think in a more nuanced way about how people behave sometimes.
It is a balance, but I certainly would come down on the side that boredom is never an excuse. That just can't be allowed to pass as a reason for criminality and doing certainly horrific things to other human beings. I think where I definitely agree with you, Iain, is that there are certain crimes that just can't be let go. Rape is certainly there, murder, stabbing. Acts that you can't simply say, oh, well, they were a certain age, therefore there's another reason, or there's something that you can just do to let them off that. There has to be a serious consequence for that, no matter what age someone is. But where I agree with others is for probably the vast majority of, let's call it petty crime, and we can have a debate about what we mean by that, but petty crime, then yes, suddenly criminalising kids for the rest of their lives would certainly be the wrong thing to do. There have to be other interventions that can be made to get those kids back on track, whatever it is that has gone wrong in their lives, whether they haven't had the education they need or they've been let down in some other capacity in their upbringing, how you get those kids back on track so they can live fulfilling lives, part of society, in good jobs, employment, whatever it takes. But I come back to that point, though, that can't be a catch-all. And I think the debate would be let down if we allowed it to become a straightforward line in the sand: above this age, criminally liable; below that age, not, when we know how severe some crimes.
But are you happy, just to answer the question, are you happy that the age of 10 is right?
I don't know is the honest answer. Educational psychologists, child psychologists can probably give a much better and clearer answer on that. 10, 12, it is probably much ado about.
I didn't actually ask you on that, sorry.
I think I'm not going to be the first one of us to say I know exactly what age it should be. I think it does depend.
The trouble is, as a society, we have to have an age, because although everybody's circumstances might be different, there has to be a legal age, I guess. Right, more questions over the next half an hour. 0345 6060 973. And don't forget, if you miss an episode of Cross Question, there's always a Cross Question podcast, which is uploaded about 11 o'clock every night. Let's go to the news headlines on LBC. It's 8:30. Here's Daryl Jackson.
A woman has been rearrested following the deaths of 4 young girls killed when a 4x4 drove into a primary school in Wimbledon. Last year, the Met had said the 48-year-old driver would face no criminal charges after suffering an epileptic seizure. An inquest jury has ruled the deaths of 5 people, including Leicester City's former owner, in a helicopter crash in 2018 was accidental. Their conclusion found it had all the necessary certificates and the pilot had done everything he could to regain control. LBC has learned thousands of new prison places in England and Wales have been delayed because of environmental regulation. Concerns around water pollution are believed to have held up at least half a dozen projects. LBC weather: clear spells in the south tonight, cloudier in the north with showers expected across Scotland and a low of 1 degree.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:33 on LBC. James Starkey, Kirsty Blackman, Craig Smith and Zoe Gardner with us answering your calls. Shuvik's in Eltham. Hello, Shuvik.
Hello, Ian. Yes, I'd like to ask the panel, in the UK, we've had low growth and low productivity for at least 20 years. So how do we improve both?
Well, the Chancellor's going to hopefully tell us tomorrow. She's set to make her long-awaited speech on promoting economic growth tomorrow morning and is expected to confirm government approval to expanding Heathrow, Gatwick and Luton airports during that speech. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer spoke to business leaders this morning and said that all future public spending decisions will face a new growth test, and he's prepared to veto policies that damage growth. Let's go to James on that first.
I mean, why? that's a huge question in terms of why we've had it. Clearly, like much of the rest of the world, we're still coming out of COVID. That is true. I think, what do they need to do? I mean, one of the interesting things about some of the things that Labour are coming forward, the policies, are, I mean, Greg might tell me that I'm wrong, but they're things that instinctively Conservatives will support. So, they're things that I would say broadly politicians have probably known we've needed to do for some time, which is we need to improve the planning system to get things moving. We need to stop saying no to various infrastructure projects because someone locally disagrees with them. I mean, I might get some exasperated looks from MPs for things in their constituency, but that is the truth, and I think that's something that we've known for a while. The test for Labour is, as we've seen from politicians, is the talking bit's the easy bit. The difficult bit's the delivery bit. So the speech tomorrow, I think there's a trail out for it tonight. You know, it looks very positive on a lot of fronts. But the test will be that when the opposition comes, whether that be in Parliament or media or public, can they withstand that?
Zoe, it's very interesting, some of the comments made by some Labour politicians over the last few days, sort of like hating bats and newts because they're preventing growth, which I would never have thought I would hear Labour politicians say. I mean, there's always got to be a balance. Do you think we've got the balance wrong and that a lot of our systems are actually preventing growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've very clearly got the balance wrong on infrastructure projects that will benefit all of the country into the future. I think there's been a disastrous level of nihilism about our politics that has refused to look to a viable future for our economy, for our population, for our environment. And that's a huge amount of what this collapse in trust that young people have with politics at the moment, because we're not building for the future. We're not building the trains we need, the houses we need. And so I think that some of the reforms that Labour is proposing might be a start there, although if they go far enough is another question. On the other hand, one infrastructure announcement that we just heard she might be making is around expanding Heathrow. I don't think that's the right approach whatsoever, and that's one infrastructure project that I would think doesn't make sense. I think it sounds good in the first place, but then you realise that it will take at least 10 to 15 years for that to be completed. If you look 10 to 15 years into the future, we would be far better off investing in developing the sustainable aviation fuels of the future, the green planes that can replace the currently massively polluting aviation industry.
To land.
Well, the experts who are looking into how to achieve growth in green aviation future argue for smaller localised hubs for planes to land at, not for expanding Heathrow, where the growth argument is really very weak.
The aviation system.
Well, these are people who work within the aviation system in many cases. There's lots of campaign groups of people actually working in the sector who are saying that this is the wrong way forward and that it just makes it impossible for us to reach our climate goals, and we need a livable future. The future of the aviation industry is in sustainable innovation, and we can be a leader in that if we take these next 10 to 15 years to invest in that kind of growth. Or we can end up with another. Well, I think it very much is either or, because the projections for the additional pollution from the expansion of the Heathrow to the third runway would completely wipe out the gains that we're making by decarbonising our electric grid. So this is actually going to wipe out the progress we would otherwise be making, and all for something that it isn't really clear the case for a lot of growth will come from it, because what we see is that the increase in air traffic is usually among frequent flyers who are going out of the UK to spend their money elsewhere. And so it's a sort of anti-levelling up move to increase a small amount of jobs and money coming into the southeast again, but for more of that money to be taken out of the country by people who are frequent travellers going and spending it elsewhere on holiday.
Greg.
If the Prime Minister wants to veto anti-growth measures, he needs to start with his own budget. Because the more I talk to businesses, the more in my own constituency and around the country, the more they're saying they're going to hire fewer people, they may lay people off, they're certainly not going to be giving pay rises. And we've got to remember where growth comes from. It comes from real businesses, real entrepreneurs, reinvesting money, creating new product lines or services, employing more people and growing the economy that way. Yeah, we've got a budget that was passed through the employer's NI, through business rates, through all sorts of different measures. The employment rights bill that's going through that's just going to make it more difficult and more expensive for business to grow. So, if the Labour government want to have a Damascus moment and turn back on a lot of those policies, I think that will help.
But they're not going to do that.
Of course they're not going to do that, but actually it's the fundamental starting point if you talk to virtually any business owner, small, medium and large, as the impact that this government's policies are having on them. And when it comes to infrastructure, I've really grappled with this Heathrow issue over the last couple of days. Do we need increased airport capacity in the United Kingdom? Yes. Is Heathrow possibly the most bonkers place to do it? Yes. Because if you look at the practicality on two sides of the fence, both sides are negative. One, it's really difficult to build a 3/4 length, because it's not even a full length runway, the third runway proposal from last time. You've got to remodel the M25, remodel the M4. You've got to remove reservoirs. You've got to demolish an energy from waste facility, an incinerator that many local authorities in that neighbourhood rely on to burn their waste to generate electricity. It is mega money, and it would put something like 600,000 more real people underneath a flight path with the noise pollution that brings. If we're going to be serious about increasing airport capacity, I think we need to relook at not necessarily reviving Boris Island, but looking at some sort of major new hub airport that can actually compete with Schiphol, which I gently point out has 6 runways, not 3. If we want to be that competitive nation, we need an airport that's going to bring people in and out over water.
Kirsty.
I've been asking, and I've written to just about every Chancellor that's passed through in my time as an MP, them to measure budgetary measures on what their carbon impact is. Right? So does this budgetary measure bring us closer to our climate change targets, or does it bring us further from our climate change targets? And basically every Chancellor has written back and said, we're not going to bother doing that. And now they're going to do it on growth. Right? Well, fine, growth is important, but so is having a planet that we can live in, as Zoe just said there. That is really key. So actually, if you're going to invest in stuff, if you're going to try and increase the number of jobs, if you're going to be reducing the amount of oil and gas that we're taking out of the sea, you need to up the number of renewables that we're doing. You need to invest more in carbon capture and storage. And the stuff that they're doing around carbon capture and storage is pitiful in comparison to what we should be doing. The money that the Labour government are putting into renewables and green tech is minute again compared to what it should be. The amount that the Labour government have pledged to put in is the amount that the Scottish government is putting in a year. Right? That's what they're putting in a year, and they are significantly bigger than the Scottish government with a significantly bigger budget. So I think if you're going to invest in growth and productivity, you need to be looking at how can we meet our climate change targets, because we need to grow sustainably. If we're going to grow, we need to grow and in a way that can keep us.
Can we launch
still here?
So, with respect, this is why we're losing the public on the environment. I was at DEFRA when we passed the Environment Bill. I think it did great things for the environment. But the reason why we're losing the public, who instinctively care about the environment, not just they live in, they care most about the environment their children are going to grow up in, is because that they feel that we're putting the environment before everything, and that we've got no growth, and that they see projects curtailed, in the name of doing things for the environment. And I think the more you lose the public on that, the more they're going to, frankly, vote for someone like Nigel Farage, who says this stuff is all totally bonkers. I don't know why you're doing it. It's costing the country money and jobs, etc. You've got... I think on the environment, instinctively, the public is with you. You've got to be able to take them with you, which means, yes, the technologies you mentioned, absolutely, things like carbon capture, etc. We're a world leader in wind power and so on, and they're great, and we should be investing in those. But we also need to make sure we're bringing along other projects as well.
But the stuff I'm speaking about creates jobs, right? The stuff I'm speaking about creates jobs. So, it's about that kind of investment in things that create jobs. The other thing that I'm really keen to see more investment in is housing. So in Scotland, we cancelled Right to Buy. You do know you cannot buy your council house at an 80% discount. So councils can build again. They can build housing, right? We've still got massive waiting lists because we've got the decimation that was created by Right to Buy. But we're building council houses again and managing to reduce those waiting lists, which is brilliant. That's really, really important. So invest in that stuff. Like people, in terms of the productivity question, people will be far more productive if they're happier, right? If you're spending your day at work worrying about how you're going to pay your electricity bill and how you're going to be able to feed your kids, you're not concentrating 100% on work during that time. You need to have enough money coming in. You need to have enough of a comfort in your life that you can give your time to work and think about work while you're there.
Come in.
Well, I wanted to lance this boil around, we can't have extra airport capacity because it's bad for the environment, but we're equally spending a ton of money on developing green technology that's going to make aviation clean. The end result has to be clean aviation, clean transport across the board, and sustainable aviation fuel is a transition to that. That's still not very good because it's still fundamentally growing food to burn it. But we do have emerging technologies that are going to make aviation, road transport, shipping, everything genuinely carbon neutral by making synthetic fuel. That does exist as a technology, but governments the world round are refusing to give a green light to it. This is literally man-made liquid hydrocarbons that work in all the internal combustion engines, jet engines that we've got today, literally made out of air and water, green hydrogen with atmospheric carbon capture. And of course, the carbon that comes out of the tailpipe is the same volume of carbon that is recaptured out of the atmosphere to make the next lot of fuel. That is coming. We can't tell people you can't fly anymore or we want to cut down the number of flights when the technology is coming that means those flights will be entirely clean.
Most people don't take a flight in a year at all. So over half of the population don't travel abroad on a plane at all, right? The people who are by far and away using actually like creating the environmental impact of flights are frequent flyers, people who take 5,
and
6
they're being taxed
flights.
on it.
Yeah, well, I think that if you're taking
Quite
5, 6, 7 flights abroad for holidays per year, then you are in the. I'm saying that these are the figures of the people who are making the greatest contribution to the pollution caused by the aviation industry. Those people can afford to be taxed higher on those flights. And I think that we need to introduce much smarter systems of taxation, in all parts of our economy here, so that we are actually targeting the people with the broadest shoulders who are having the greatest impact.
I mean, I'm in
But isn't that happening already? I mean, given that people who travel 5, 6, 7 times, I imagine they're normally business trips rather than people going on holiday.
Actually, the growth area is all in leisure travel, not in business travel at all.
Well, it might be the growth overall, but I mean, I don't know anybody that takes 7 holidays a year. I mean, you might have 2 or 3 possibly, but the level of taxation, particularly on long-haul flights now, is massive compared to what it was.
Yeah, and that's a positive if that is being reinvested into these technologies that we're talking about that will allow us to continue to travel in this way into the future without destroying the environment, but not if they're being invested into, a 10 to 15 to, let's be honest, it always drags on for longer than they say anyway, maybe 20-year project for a 3/4 length runway at Heathrow that all it's going to do is benefit a small number of people who are very frequent flyers. And it's not even like, the jobs in that industry, the pay has dropped, the number of jobs has dropped per flight. It's not a sustainable way that we're approaching it for the time being, and especially not the third runway.
Right, we're all looking forward to our fun question for the end. I don't know if you're familiar with that, James, but we always have something fun. And I'll tell you what the question is now, so you have 10 minutes to prepare the most hilarious answer. Exactly. 8:47.
This is LBC.
Hello.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
We are in the middle of Cross Question. I was just in the middle of telling what I thought was going to be a very funny anecdote and realised we had to come back on the programme. James Starkey is here, Kirsty Blackman, Greg Smith and Zoe Gardner. Our next question is from Chris in Stubbington. Treasury Minister Emma Reynolds has said shop and service firms won't be compelled to accept cash. Is this discriminating against vulnerable and disabled people? So the Economic Secretary to the Treasury today told MPs that the government has no plans to regulate businesses, big or small, to compel them to accept cash, but added that Britain is not anywhere near becoming a cashless society. Zoe, let's start with you on this.
There's clearly a need to maintain access to being able to purchase essential services with cash. There's lots of reasons why people can't access bank accounts. One of the examples that comes to mind is women who are trying to escape a violent partner, or men who are trying to escape a violent partner in some cases as well, might be being under economic coercion and control. The only way they might be able to escape is by collecting a bit of cash and then making their escape. That's just one among all sorts of different examples of people who are in dangerous and vulnerable situations and need to be able to access cash. Is quite straightforward. I don't see any good reason for.
But there are quite a lot of businesses now that say credit card only. I mean, restaurants, for example, there are some, certainly ones that I've been to recently, who have just gone card only.
Yeah, I had an experience with that the other day. I was in Brighton and I went for dinner and they had card only, but then their system was down, their Wi-Fi was down. So we ended up not having to pay at all. So maybe they should introduce a cash alternative. We'd have happily paid cash.
James?
I think certain services they're dying out with the post office and things like that, perhaps. But the question is, should you legislate for it? Because the reality is, as we just said, it is dying out. I rarely take cash out, and one of the things for government is that it's been able to flush out money laundering, because those places tend to be cash only. So it's got a positive impact as well. The more you force out cash, but it's kind of naturally happening. We've now got our credit cards on our phone. I'm always scared when you realise how much you can actually spend on your phone. When it first came in, I think it was £60, and I bought a washing machine the other day, very exciting, and realised I could spend £500 just by clicking 2 buttons on my phone.
So you bought 2?
Yeah, so I got a couple of them just for that. But so I think there's a reality of it. Then the question for government is, Zoe's right. There are people who are vulnerable who. There's what is wise, but it's where do you want those to be?
Greg?
Yeah, I very much agree with James. I'm guilty that I can't remember the last time I bought anything with cash, and don't even use a physical debit or credit card, and everything through Apple Pay on the phone these days. In fact, to really highlight that, there's the mad panic every summer in the constituency going around all the village fetes and so on before I leave. No, I don't have any cash. I'm going to have to do a 12-mile round trip to go to a cash point before.
So the stores don't have a little machine now.
You know what? Some of them do.
Because you can buy these little machines for like 20 quid.
Yeah, you can, and actually they're brilliant, and some of them do, but lots don't. But actually, going back to that more serious point, we are not a cashless society. There are many people that still prefer cash. There are many people, Zoe explained, that may be in a very desperate position that do need cash. There's lots of things where they haven't got that card reader yet. I think like taking my kids to places, where you go to one of these groups for the kids and you drop a couple of quid in a glass on the way in. Well, that's just not practical to pay by card. So I think cash is still important. There are people that still rely on it, and it should be a generally accepted thing that cash should be taken.
Kirsty, if you answer very speedily, we can fit another question in.
It's one of the real things that people who've got debt problems find, that actually using cash, because you know exactly how much you've got, you know exactly how much you're spending. So I think particularly for essential services, it's really important to keep cash.
Well done. Right, Karen in Haywards Heath says, Chris Whitty has urged MPs not to rush the legislation of assisted dying. Has the panel's view on this idea changed since it was first being discussed in the autumn? Now, England's Chief Medical Officer said today that he's concerned that under the bill put forward by Labour MP Kim Leadbeater, assisted dying would have to be legalised across England and Wales within 2 years of the law being passed. Kirsty?
We didn't take part in this vote on the basis that it doesn't affect people in Scotland. My views are still really, really mixed on this. I think that we need to look at everything. My particular concern is around disabled people who might feel that they're forced into it. This doesn't apply in this case because it's a very restricted group of people that would be eligible to have the assisted dying support. But I do have concerns about people feeling that they're a burden.
Is there no move for this to happen in Scotland?
There is, but it's up to the Scottish Parliament to make that decision.
Yeah, sure.
And do you know what? I'm very glad I don't have to make this decision. I'm not abdicating my responsibility. It's not my responsibility. It's the responsibility of the MSPs.
Okay.
It's a really, really tough question.
Greg.
So I voted against at second reading, and I intend to vote against at third reading as well. It's one of those issues that really has challenged me. I've thought a lot about it. I am, like Gertie, I'm very, very worried about people feeling coerced into doing it, people feeling bullied into going down this path. And I'm not convinced that the safeguards are in place for this legislation to be allowed to pass. So I agree with Chris Whitty that it definitely should not be rushed, which I think we are in a fear. There is a fear that we are going down that path, but equally I hear some of the most emotionally charged arguments. A lady came to my surgery a few months ago who had a terminal brain tumour, and it was a difficult conversation as she begged me to vote to allow her to have that decision to end her own life. And it's hard to argue back when you're faced with someone who you just can't imagine being in that position. But I still, I've got that duty on my shoulders, as all members of Parliament do, respecting the Scottish colleagues' position on that, to make a choice. And okay. I don't think I could sleep at night if I thought there were still gaps and there were still areas where this legislation could be abused and people could be put into an impossible position.
James.
One point, maybe this is selfish. My father passed away last year from MS, and when this bill came through, it was something that I was glad that didn't have to be considered, to be totally honest. And I think sometimes choice in life makes things more difficult. It doesn't actually make things easier, and we forget that. And I understand, and I've seen some of the cases. What I would say is I really do not think the way that they've gone about it is the right way to legislate. It shouldn't have been brought through a private member's bill. There should have been much more time to debate it. There should have been much more availability of witnesses. And for something that's so profound and serious, I am really disappointed that the space hasn't been given in Parliament for this to be done properly. And I know there's a number of MPs, I think, who one of the reasons they voted against it is for that reason there, and I think I think it hasn't been given the space.
It's getting much more debate time than many government bills do. Honestly, in terms of hours, it really is.
I don't think it's had the scrutiny. Sorry. It was out later than it should have been.
Sorry.
I strongly support the right to choose to end your life, and the assisted dying bill, I think, is definitely something that MPs should vote in favour. I would say that I hear what others have said about the fears of disabled communities. I think in a context where we've seen the rhetoric coming out from the Treasury just in the last couple of days about, talking about disabled and seriously ill people taking the mick from the British public and having, how there's going to be ruthless cuts to their support. I think there is good reason for disabled people to feel like they are being targeted, like they are being scapegoated, and like their rights are under attack from this government. But I think that needs to be addressed by a serious change in tone from the government when it comes to disability and long-term sickness. And I do support people's move to be able to end their own lives.
Right, our fun question from Joanna in Putney. A man from London has set a new Guinness World Record by visiting 42 museums in a 24-hour period in October. He's now trying to set another record, the most museums visited in a year. But which one that he might have missed should he be heading to? Kirsty.
One of my strangest and most random childhood memories is going to a museum in the Lake District where they made bobbins. So little bobbins for sewing. And I remember this vividly because I just loved watching it. It was such a cool thing. They were making these bobbins. There was all this wooden stuff. There was wood shavings everywhere. And I'm not sure why my parents thought that this was a good idea to take children to, but it was inspired because I absolutely loved it. So something incredibly random like that.
James?
The best one I can think of is on the Vote Leave campaign. I'm pretty sure we sent Boris to a marble museum somewhere in the southwest, and it seems worthy of visiting. I think Boris had a good time there, and we won, so it couldn't be that bad.
I've just been reading that chapter in his autobiography. Zoe?
The Hunterian Museum at the Royal College of Surgeons is fascinating if you're not squeamish. It's about the history of surgery, and it has loads of little like samples in jars.
No, definitely not. Craig?
I'd heartily recommend the Roald Dahl Museum in Great Missenden in my constituency, which is a fantastic day out. But if he's looking for his next challenge, it's reminded me, and I stress I wasn't on this stag do, but a friend of mine once went on a stag do where they attempted to visit and have a pint in all 44 Wetherspoons in Wales. That, I suggest, is his next challenge.
Well, I suggest the Lloyd George Museum in Criccieth in North Wales. It's very small, but well worth a visit. Right, thank you all very much indeed. On tomorrow's panel, we have the former Conservative Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, the Liberal Democrat frontbencher, Sarah Olney, the journalist, Ella Whelan, and the writer and broadcaster, Paul Mason. But coming up in the next hour, I'm delighted to say that Sir Bill Browder is back with us to take your calls, the anti-corruption campaigner who's head of the Magnitsky Global Justice Campaign and also the chief executive of the finance company Hermitage Capital. We're going to be asking you, are sanctions the best way of the UK and the West hampering Russia's illegal war? You heard what Donald Trump said last week in a tweet aimed at President Putin. The EU has renewed sanctions against Russia after the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban backed down from vetoing them, with the Polish Prime Minister saying Trump helped here. Well, who'd have thought? Your questions, your calls to Bill Browder over the next 60 minutes here on LBC 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, police are questioning for a second time the driver of a 4x4 which drove into a primary school, killing two 8-year-old girls. Nuria Sajjad and Selina Lau died in Wimbledon in southwest London in July 2023. The Met Police initially said the driver wouldn't face any further charges after suffering an epileptic seizure. Nuria's father, Saj Butt, spoke to Sheila Fergity on LBC on the day Scotland Yard reopened the inquiry last October.
Nuria and Selina paid the ultimate price here. There were more than 40 other girls there who witnessed this, who also deserve answers.
Yeah, and the teachers.
As they grow up, as they ask Mummy, Daddy, what happened? Why? Mummy and Daddy need to have those answers.
An inquiry juries concluded no one was to blame for the helicopter crash which killed a Leicester City former owner outside its stadium. He was one of 5 people who died when it came down in 2018. Philip Shepherd Casey is representing his son.
As leader of our family,